Before you turn away, imagine this. A train full of children, each one carrying nothing but a battered suitcase and a hope for a new life. Imagine the faces of brothers and sisters clutching each other's hands, whispering promises to never let go. Now imagine that train vanishing into the endless American prairie. No wreckage, no witnesses, no answers. Only a single, blood-stained shoe left behind. This is not just a story about missing children. It's about the families who waited, the mothers who never stopped searching, and the secrets that still haunt the tracks 100 years later. Listen closely, because the truth behind the widow's children is more heartbreaking and more mysterious than anyone ever dared to believe. The year was 1921, and the city of St. Louis was a place of shadows and second chances. The war was over, but its scars lingered in the faces of men on street corners and the empty chairs at kitchen tables. For the children of the widow's home for lost children, the world was a patchwork of memories, some too painful to remember, others too precious to forget. The widow's home sat on a quiet street, its brick walls softened by ivy and the laughter of children. But inside, life was hard. The matron, Mrs. Agnes Blackwell, was a woman shaped by loss. She wore black every day, her hair pulled into a severe bun, her eyes sharp as winter ice. Some children feared her, but most respected her. She was the only mother many of them had ever known. On a cold March morning, the children gathered in the courtyard, their breath rising in white clouds. Each child clutched a small bundle, one change of clothes, a photograph, maybe a letter from a parent they barely remembered. The older children tried to comfort the younger ones, but their own hands shook with nerves. 12-year-old Clara stood at the front of the line, her little brother Henry pressed close to her side. Clara had been at the widow's home for 3 years, ever since their mother died in the influenza epidemic. She remembered the day they arrived, the way Mrs. Blackwell knelt to button Henry's coat, the way she promised Clara that she would always keep them together. Now, as the orphan train waited at the station, Clara felt that promise slipping away. Mrs. Blackwell moved down the line, checking names against her list. "You'll be good children," she said, her voice low but kind. "You'll make your new families proud. And remember, no matter where you go, you are never alone." Clara squeezed Henry's hand. "We'll stay together," she whispered. "I promise." The walk to the train station was quiet. The city was waking up, streetcars rattling, vendors shouting, the river shining in the early light. The children marched in pairs, watched by a handful of nuns and a single railway guard. Some of the younger ones cried, but most were silent, their eyes wide with fear and hope. At the station, the train waited. Black engine hissing. Carriages lined up like a promise. The conductor, a tall man with a gray mustache, took Mrs. Blackwell's envelope. "For the receiving agent in Kansas," she said. "No one else is to open it." The children climbed aboard, finding seats in the last 2 carriages. Clara and Henry sat together, their bundle tucked beneath their feet. Around them, children whispered to each other, sharing stories of the families they hoped to find. Some dreamed of farms with horses and fields of corn. Others just wanted a bed of their own, a place to belong. Mrs. Blackwell stood on the platform, her hands folded tight. She watched until the last carriage disappeared into the morning fog. The train rolled out of St. Louis, heading west. The city gave way to fields, the fields to endless prairie. The children watched the world pass by, their faces pressed to the glass. For many, it was the first time they had ever left the city. The journey was supposed to take 2 days. The train would stop in small towns along the way, where families waited to choose a child, a new son to help on the farm, a daughter to keep the house. The children had been told to smile, to say, "Yes, ma'am," and "No, sir," to be grateful for whatever came. But as the hours passed, something changed. The conductor grew tense, checking his watch and glancing out the window. The nuns whispered in the corridor, their faces pale. At one stop, a railway guard boarded the train, his uniform stained with mud. Clara felt the tension, but tried to keep Henry calm. She told him stories about their mother, about the house they used to live in, about the garden where they once played. Henry listened, his head on her shoulder, his thumb in his mouth. That night, as the train rattled through the darkness, Clara woke to the sound of voices. She peeked through the curtain and saw the conductor arguing with a stranger, a man in a dark coat, his face hidden by the brim of his hat. "We're not supposed to stop here," the conductor said. The stranger's voice was low and cold. "You'll do as you're told. No one will ever know." Clara pulled Henry close, her heart pounding. She wanted to wake the others, to run, to scream. But she was just a child, and the world outside was too big, too dark. The train slowed, then stopped. The children stirred, confused and afraid. The nuns tried to calm them, but the fear was contagious. Suddenly the doors burst open. Men in masks rushed in, shouting orders. The children screamed, clutching each other, trying to hide. Clara held Henry tight, refusing to let go. One by one, the children were herded off the train into the cold night. Clara lost sight of Henry in the chaos. She called his name, but her voice was swallowed by the wind. When the sun rose, the train was gone. The children were gone. Only a single, blood-stained shoe remained, left beside the tracks near a lonely stretch of prairie. Back in St. Louis, Mrs. Blackwell waited for news. When the train failed to arrive in Kansas, the authorities searched the tracks. They found nothing, no wreckage, no sign of struggle, no footprints in the mud, only the shoe. The newspapers called it the Orphan train mystery. Some said the children had run away. Others whispered of bandits or worse. Mrs. Blackwell was questioned for days, but she had no answers. "They were my children," she wept. "I would have given my life for them." As the weeks passed, hope faded. The world moved on, and the widow's children became just another unsolved mystery. But for Clara, her brother, and the others, the story was far from over. But as the search for the missing children begins, a hidden clue will surface, one that points to a secret no one expected. What really happened on the orphan train, and who was willing to kill to keep it buried? The next chapter will reveal the first crack in the official story. Subscribe now so you don't miss the secret that changes everything. The days after the orphan train vanished were filled with confusion, disbelief, and a growing sense of dread. In St. Louis, the widow's home for lost children was quieter than it had ever been. The empty beds, the missing laughter, the silence in the halls, all of it pressed down on Mrs. Blackwell like a weight she could not lift. She sat at her desk, staring at the list of names she had checked off just days before. Clara, Henry, Ruthie, Samuel, dozens of children, each with a story, each with a hope for a new life. Now their names were all she had left. The authorities arrived the morning after the train failed to reach Kansas. They questioned Mrs. Blackwell for hours, their voices sharp, their eyes suspicious. "Did you see anything unusual before the train left?" "No, sir." The children were excited, but nothing out of the ordinary. "Did anyone threaten you? Did you receive any strange letters?" "No, nothing." But the questions kept coming, and with them the doubt. The newspapers printed her picture, calling her the Widow of St. Louis. Some praised her for her years of service. Others hinted that she knew more than she was saying. Mrs. Blackwell tried to ignore the rumors, but they crept into her dreams. She saw the children's faces, heard their voices calling her name. She woke each morning with tears on her cheeks and a prayer on her lips. Meanwhile, the search for the missing train began in earnest. The railroad company sent men to walk the tracks, mile by mile from St. Louis to Kansas. They found nothing. No broken rails, no overturned carriages, no sign of a struggle. It was as if the train had simply vanished into thin air. But then on the third day, a railway worker named Tom Haskins found something strange near a lonely stretch of prairie. He was walking the tracks, eyes on the ground, when he spotted a flash of red in the grass. It was a child's shoe, small, scuffed, and stained with blood. Tom picked it up, turning it over in his hands. The leather was cracked, the laces frayed. Inside, written in careful letters, was a name. Henry. Tom's heart pounded. He wrapped the shoe in his handkerchief and hurried back to the nearest station. The authorities took the shoe, examining it for clues. They sent men to search the area, but found nothing else. No footprints, no discarded belongings, no sign of the children. The newspapers seized on the story. "Bloodstained shoe found near missing orphan train," the headline screamed. "Foul play suspected." The city buzzed with rumors. Some said the children had been kidnapped by bandits. Others whispered of a secret society or a curse on the widow's home. Mrs. Blackwell was called in to identify the shoe. She recognized it immediately. "It's Henry's," she said, her voice breaking. "He wore it every day. I mended it myself." The sight of the shoe broke something in her. She wept openly, her hands shaking. The authorities tried to comfort her, but she pushed them away. "I have to find them," she said. "They're my children. I have to bring them home." The search expanded. Volunteers from St. Louis and Kansas joined the effort, scouring the fields and woods along the railway line. They found nothing. No bodies, no signs of life, no answers. But the shoe was not the only clue. A week after the train vanished, a farmer named Mr. Grady found a scrap of paper caught in his barbed wire fence. It was torn, stained with mud, but a few words were still legible. "Help us? We are near the river. Clara!" The authorities rushed to the river, searching the banks for any sign of the children. They found footprints in the mud, small, bare, some running, some walking. But the trail ended at the water's edge. The river was swollen from spring rains, its current swift and dangerous. The searchers feared the worst. But Mrs. Blackwell refused to give up hope. She stood on the riverbank, calling the children's names, her voice echoing across the water. "Clara, Henry, Ruthie, Samuel, come home." The wind carried her words away, but she kept calling day after day. Meanwhile, in the small towns along the railway line, people began to talk. Some remembered seeing the train pass by, its windows dark, its whistle silent. Others claimed to have seen men in dark coats near the tracks, or to have heard screams in the night. A few said they saw a group of children walking through the fields, led by a girl with dark hair and a determined look in her eyes. The authorities followed every lead, but each one ended in disappointment. The children were gone, and the only clues were a blood-stained shoe and a desperate note. Back in St. Louis, the widow's home became a place of mourning. The remaining children huddled together at night, whispering stories about the missing train. Some said the children had run away to start a new life. Others believed they had been taken by ghosts or by the devil himself. Mrs. Blackwell tried to comfort them, but her own heart was broken. She spent her days writing letters to the families who had been waiting for the children in Kansas, explaining the unexplainable, begging for forgiveness. One evening, as she sat at her desk, a knock came at the door. It was Tom Haskins, the railway worker who had found the shoe. "I thought you should have this," he said, handing her a small, folded piece of paper. Mrs. Blackwell opened it, her hands trembling. Inside was a map drawn in a child's hand. It showed the railway line, the river, and a small X marked safe. She stared at the map, hope flickering in her chest. "Where did you find this?" Tom shrugged. "Near the place where I found the shoe. It was stuck in the grass." Mrs. Blackwell clutched the map to her chest. "Thank you. Thank you so much." That night she dreamed of Clara and Henry, standing on the riverbank, waving to her. "We're safe, Mama," Clara called. "Don't stop looking." She woke with tears on her cheeks and a new sense of purpose. The next morning she went to the authorities with the map. At first they dismissed it as a child's fantasy, but Mrs. Blackwell insisted. "Please," she begged. "They're out there. I know it." Reluctantly, the authorities agreed to search the area marked on the map. They gathered a group of volunteers and set out at dawn, following the railway line to the river. The search was slow and difficult. The fields were muddy, the riverbanks overgrown with weeds. But Mrs. Blackwell pressed on, her eyes scanning the ground for any sign of the children. At last, they reached the spot marked safe. It was a small grove of trees hidden from the tracks by a rise in the land. The searchers spread out, calling the children's names. For a long time there was only silence. Then from the shadows a voice called out, "Over here." The searchers rushed to the sound, their hearts pounding. In the shade of the trees they found a small camp. Blankets spread on the ground, a fire pit, a few scraps of food. But the children were gone. Mrs. Blackwell fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. She picked up a scrap of cloth, a piece of Henry's shirt, and pressed it to her lips. "They were here," she whispered. "They were so close." The authorities searched the area for days, but found no further trace of the children. The camp was abandoned, the trail cold. But Mrs. Blackwell refused to give up. She returned to the grove every day, leaving food and blankets, hoping the children would return. Meanwhile, the newspapers continued to print stories about the missing train. Some called it a tragedy, others a scandal. A few suggested that the children had been taken by a secret society or sold to the highest bidder. But for Mrs. Blackwell, the truth was simpler and more painful. "They were my children," she said, "and I will never stop looking for them." As the weeks turned months, hope faded. The world moved on, and the widow's children became just another unsolved mystery. But in the quiet moments, when the wind rustled the grass and the river sang its song, Mrs. Blackwell listened for the voices of the children she had lost. And somewhere out on the endless prairie, Clara and Henry and the others kept moving, always searching for home, always hoping to be found. But as Mrs. Blackwell clings to hope, a new witness will come forward, someone who saw what happened that night on the train. What secret are they hiding, and why are they so afraid to speak? The next chapter will reveal a testimony that could change everything. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next twist in the mystery of the widow's children. The summer of 1921 was hotter than anyone could remember. The city of St. Louis baked under a relentless sun, and the fields along the Orphan train's route turned to dust. But for Mrs. Blackwell, the world had narrowed to a single hope, that somewhere her children were still alive. She returned to the riverbank every day, searching for footprints, scraps of cloth, any sign that Clara, Henry, and the others had survived. She left food and blankets in the grove, whispered prayers into the wind, and watched the horizon for a miracle. The authorities, meanwhile, had all but given up. The search parties grew smaller, the headlines faded, and the world's attention turned to other tragedies. The widow's home for lost children became a place of ghosts, empty beds, silent halls, and the echo of laughter that would never return. But then, one afternoon in late July, a knock came at Mrs. Blackwell's door. She opened it to find a young woman standing on the steps, her dress dusty, her hair pulled back in a messy braid. She looked no older than 16, but her eyes were old, haunted, wary, and full of secrets. "My name is Lila," the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was on the train." Mrs. Blackwell's heart leapt. She pulled Lila inside, set her down at the kitchen table, and poured her a glass of water. "Tell me everything," she said, her hands trembling. Lila stared at the table, twisting the glass in her hands. "I don't remember all of it. It's like a bad dream. But I know what I saw." She took a deep breath and began her story. The night the train stopped, Lila had been one of the older children on the train, responsible for watching over the little ones. She remembered the excitement as they left St. Louis, the promise of new families, new homes, a new life. She remembered Clara and Henry sitting together by the window, and Ruthie, who sang lullabies to the youngest children. But as the train rolled west, the mood changed. The conductor grew nervous, checking his watch and whispering with the nuns. At one stop, a group of men in dark coats boarded the train, their faces hidden by hats and scarves. "They didn't look like railway men," Lila said. "They didn't talk to us. They just watched." That night, as the children slept, the train slowed and stopped in the middle of nowhere. Lila woke to the sound of voices, angry, urgent, afraid. She peeked through the curtain and saw the conductor arguing with one of the men in dark coats. "We're not supposed to stop here," the conductor said. The man's voice was cold. "You'll do as you're told. No one will ever know." The doors opened, and the men rushed in. They shouted orders, herding the children from their beds. Some of the nuns tried to resist, but they were pushed aside. Lila grabbed Ruthie's hand and tried to find Clara and Henry, but the crowd was too thick. She was shoved out of the carriage and into the darkness. The men forced the children to walk across the fields away from the tracks. Lila stumbled, her feet bare, her heart pounding. She heard Henry crying, Clara calling his name, but she couldn't reach them. At the edge of a grove, the men stopped. They counted the children, whispered among themselves, and then split the group in two. "They took half of us one way, half the other," Lila said, her voice shaking. "I never saw Clara or Henry again." Lila's group was marched through the night, deeper into the prairie. At dawn, the men left them in a clearing, warning them to stay quiet or else. "We waited for hours," Lila said. "Some of the children cried. Some just stared at the ground. When the men didn't come back, we started walking. They wandered for days, surviving on wild berries and rainwater. One by one, the children disappeared, some too weak to go on, others lost in the tall grass. Lila was found by a farmer, half-starved and feverish. He took her in, nursed her back to health, and sent word to the authorities. But by the time they arrived, Lila was too afraid to speak. "I thought they'd come back for me," she whispered. "I thought if I told anyone, they'd find me and finish what they started." Mrs. Blackwell reached across the table and took Lila's hand. "You're safe now. No one will hurt you here." Lila nodded, tears streaming down her face. The first real clue. Lila's story changed everything. For the first time, there was proof that the children hadn't simply run away or drowned in the river. Someone had taken them, someone who knew how to make a train disappear, how to silence witnesses, how to leave no trace but a single blood-stained shoe. The authorities reopened the investigation. Detectives from St. Louis and Kansas arrived, questioning Lila for hours. She told them everything she remembered: the men in dark coats, the arguments, the way the group was split in two. They searched the area where Lila had been found, but the prairie had swallowed any evidence. The other children from her group were never found. But Lila's testimony gave Mrs. Blackwell new hope. She returned to the riverbank, searching for signs of the other children. She posted notices in every town along the railway line, begging for information. One day, a letter arrived from a woman in a small Kansas town. She had seen a group of children, dirty and barefoot, walking along the road at dawn. They were led by a girl with dark hair and a determined look in her eyes. Mrs. Blackwell packed a bag and boarded the next train west. She traveled from town to town, following the trail of rumors and sightings. In each place, she found traces: an abandoned camp, a scrap of cloth, a child's drawing left on a fence post. But she never found Clara or Henry. The world reacts. The story of the missing orphan train spread across the country. Newspapers ran headlines: "Orphan train vanishes. Foul play suspected. Children missing, only clue a bloodstained shoe." The public was outraged, but the authorities were stumped. Some blamed the railway company, accusing them of negligence. Others pointed fingers at Mrs. Blackwell, suggesting she had sold the children or staged the disappearance for attention. But most people simply mourned. Churches held prayer vigils. Families who had been waiting for the children in Kansas wept for the sons and daughters they would never meet. A few people, though, saw opportunity in the tragedy. A traveling preacher arrived in St. Louis, claiming he could speak to the spirits of the lost children. He held seances in the widow's home, charging desperate parents for a chance to hear their child's voice. Mrs. Blackwell threw him out, her grief turning to anger. "My children are not ghosts," she said. "They are out there, somewhere, and I will find them." The secret letter. One evening, as Mrs. Blackwell sat at her desk, a knock came at the door. It was Tom Haskins, the railway worker who had found Henry's shoe. "I have something for you," he said, handing her a small, folded piece of paper. Mrs. Blackwell opened it, her hands trembling. Inside was a note, written in a child's hand. "We are near the river. Don't stop looking. Clara." The note was new, the ink barely dry. Mrs. Blackwell's heart leapt. She showed the note to the authorities, but they dismissed it as a cruel prank. But Mrs. Blackwell knew better. She recognized Clara's handwriting, the way she looped her R and dotted her I with a tiny circle. She packed a bag and set out for the river, determined to follow the trail as far as it would go. The girl in the shadows. As Mrs. Blackwell searched, Lila stayed at the widow's home, helping with the younger children. She became a quiet presence, moving through the halls like a ghost. But at night she sat by the window, watching the stars, whispering prayers for the friends she had lost. One night she heard a noise outside, a soft tapping on the glass. She opened the window and saw a girl standing in the shadows, her hair tangled, her dress torn. "Clara?" Lila whispered. The girl nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "Come inside," Lila said, reaching out her hand. Clara climbed through the window, collapsing into Lila's arms. "I found Henry," she whispered. "But we're not safe. They're still looking for us." Lila held her close, tears streaming down her face. "You're safe now," she said. "You're home." The truth comes out. Clara's return was a miracle. Mrs. Blackwell rushed home, weeping with relief. The authorities questioned Clara for hours, but her story matched Lila's in every detail. The men in dark coats, the train stopping in the night, the children split into two groups. Clara told them how she and Henry had escaped, hiding in the tall grass until the men left. They wandered for days, surviving on wild berries and rainwater, until Henry grew too weak to go on. "I left him by the river," Clara sobbed. "I told him I'd come back. I promised." Mrs. Blackwell held her close. "We'll find him. I promise." The authorities searched the riverbank but found no trace of Henry. But Clara's story, combined with Lila's, finally convinced the world that the children had not simply vanished. They had been taken by men who knew how to make a train disappear, how to silence witnesses, how to leave no trace but a single blood-stained shoe. The search began anew with fresh hope and determination. But as the hunt for the missing children intensifies, a new enemy emerges, one who will stop at nothing to keep the truth buried. Who are the men in dark coats, and what are they hiding? The next chapter will reveal a conspiracy that goes deeper than anyone imagined. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next chilling twist in the mystery of the widow's children. The return of Clara to the widow's home was a miracle, but it was also a warning. Her story and Lila's had finally convinced the authorities that the children had not simply vanished. They had been taken. But by whom and why? The city of St. Louis buzzed with rumors. The newspapers ran new headlines. Orphan train conspiracy, who took the children? Survivors speak, the men in dark coats. The public demanded answers, and for the first time, the authorities seemed determined to find them. But as the search for the missing children intensified, so did the danger. Mrs. Blackwell kept Clara and Lila close, refusing to let them out of her sight. She watched the street from her window, her heart pounding every time a stranger passed by. She knew that whoever had taken the children was still out there, and that they would do anything to keep their secrets buried. The police questioned Clara and Lila again and again, trying to piece together the events of that night. They drew maps, showed photographs, and asked the same questions over and over. Did you see their faces? No, they wore hats and scarves. Did they say anything to you? They told us to be quiet. They said if we ran, they'd find us. The girls described the men as tall, with rough voices and heavy boots. They remembered the smell of tobacco and sweat, the glint of a silver watch, the way one man limped as he walked. The police sent word to every town along the railway line, asking for information about strangers, about men with limps, about anyone who might have seen the children. They received dozens of letters, but most were dead ends. But then, a letter arrived from a small town in Kansas. It was from a woman named Mrs. Hattie Wilcox, who ran a boarding house near the tracks. Dear Sirs, the letter began, I saw a group of men and children pass by my house the night the train disappeared. The men were rough-looking, and the children seemed scared. One of the men had a limp. I stayed in the barn behind my house for a few hours, then left before dawn. I thought it was strange, but I was afraid to say anything. I hope this helps. The police rushed to Kansas, bringing Mrs. Blackwell, Clara, and Lila with them. They found Mrs. Wilcox, who showed them the barn. Inside, they found scraps of cloth, a broken doll, and a child's drawing on the wall, a picture of a train, a river, and a group of children holding hands. Clara recognized the drawing immediately. That's Henry's, she whispered. He always drew trains. The police searched the area, questioning everyone in town. Some remembered seeing the group. Others claimed not to know anything. But one man, a railway worker named Mr. Dobbs, came forward with a story. I saw them, he said. The men in dark coats. They paid me to keep quiet, to look the other way. I didn't know what they were doing, I swear. The police pressed him for details. Mr. Dobbs described how the men had loaded the children into 2 wagons and driven off into the night. He gave them a direction, west, toward the old mining camps. The search moved west, following the trail of the wagons. The police, Mrs. Blackwell, and the girls traveled from town to town, asking questions, showing photographs, searching for any sign of the missing children. In one town, they found a shopkeeper who remembered selling food to a group of men and children. In another, a farmer recalled seeing a wagon stuck in the mud, the children inside looking pale and frightened. But the trail was always cold by the time they arrived. The men in dark coats seemed to be always one step ahead. The conspiracy unfolds. As the search continued, a new theory began to take shape. The police discovered that several orphan trains had gone missing in the past year, always in remote areas, always with no survivors. The authorities had dismissed these cases as accidents, runaways, or bad luck. But now, with Clara and Lila's stories, a pattern emerged. Someone was targeting the orphan trains. But why? The answer came from an unexpected source. A reporter named Edward Finch, who had been following the story for weeks, approached Mrs. Blackwell with a stack of old newspapers. "I think I know what's happening," he said. "Look at this." He showed her articles about missing children, about families who had paid large sums to adopt orphans, only to be told the children had run away. He pointed to stories about wealthy couples desperate for a child, about rumors of a black market for orphans. "They're selling the children," Finch said, his voice grim, "to the highest bidder. That's why the trains disappear. That's why the men in dark coats are always one step ahead." Mrs. Blackwell felt sick. She thought of Clara, Henry, and the others, children who had already lost everything, now stolen and sold like cattle. The police were skeptical at first, but as Finch showed them more evidence, letters, receipts, witness statements, they began to believe. The search took on new urgency. The authorities raided boarding houses, questioned adoption agents, and followed every lead. They found forged papers, false names, and a network of men who moved from town to town, always just out of reach. But the children were still missing. The widow's resolve. Mrs. Blackwell refused to give up. She traveled with the police, searching every town, every camp, every farmhouse. She spoke to anyone who would listen, begging for information, offering rewards, promising forgiveness to anyone who helped. Clara and Lila became her partners in the search. They remembered details the adults missed, a song one of the men sang, the smell of a certain kind of soap, the way the wagons creaked as they moved. One night, as they camped by the side of the road, Clara had a dream. She saw Henry sitting by a fire, his face dirty but his eyes bright. "We're close, Mama," he whispered. "Don't stop looking." She woke with a start, her heart pounding. She told Mrs. Blackwell about the dream, and the older woman hugged her tight. "We won't stop," she promised. "Not ever." The first break. The breakthrough came in a mining town called Silver Creek. The police, following a tip from a local boy, found a hidden cellar beneath an abandoned saloon. Inside they found beds made of straw, scraps of children's clothing, and a list of names, some crossed out, some still legible. Clara scanned the list, her eyes searching for Henry's name. She found it near the bottom, next to a date. April 12th. "That's his birthday," she whispered. The police searched the town, questioning everyone. They found a woman who remembered seeing a group of children led by a man with a limp. She said the children looked scared, but the man told her they were his nieces and nephews. The police followed the trail to a nearby ranch where they found more evidence, clothes, toys, and a photograph of a group of children, including Henry. But the children were gone. The rancher, when questioned, claimed to know nothing. But the police found a hidden room in the barn filled with adoption papers, letters, and money. The conspiracy was real. The enemy revealed. As the investigation deepened, the police uncovered the leader of the operation, a man named Silas Crowley, known for his charm and cruelty. Crowley had worked as an adoption agent, a railway guard, and a preacher. He moved from town to town, always changing his name, always staying one step ahead. Crowley's men were loyal, paid well to keep secrets and silence witnesses. They threatened anyone who asked questions, bribed officials, and used violence when necessary. The authorities issued warrants for Crowley and his men, but they vanished into the wilderness. Mrs. Blackwell, Clara, and Lila pressed on, following every lead, searching every town. They found more children, some alive, some lost forever. Each reunion was a miracle, each loss a heartbreak. But Henry was still missing. the final clue. One evening, as they camped near the river, a stranger approached their fire. He was an old man, his face lined with sorrow. "I know where your boy is," he said. "I saw him not 2 days ago. He's with Crowley, heading north." Mrs. Blackwell's heart leapt. "Where? Tell us, please." The old man pointed to the mountains. "There's an old cabin near the pass. Crowley's hiding there. But be careful, he's dangerous." The police gathered their men and set out at dawn. Mrs. Blackwell, Clara, and Lila with them. They rode hard, following the old man's directions, their hearts pounding with hope and fear. As they neared the cabin, they heard voices, children's voices, singing a lullaby. Clara recognized the song. It was the one her mother used to sing, the one she had taught Henry. She ran ahead, bursting into the clearing. There, sitting by the fire, was Henry. He looked up, his face dirty, but his eyes bright. "Clara!" he cried, running into her arms. Mrs. Blackwell wept, holding them both close. The police arrested Crowley and his men, freeing the remaining children. The conspiracy was exposed, the truth finally revealed. But the scars would remain forever. But as the children return home, the world must reckon with the truth. How many more orphan trains vanished, and how many secrets still lie buried along the tracks? The next chapter will reveal the aftermath, the reckoning, and the haunting legacy of the widow's children. Subscribe now so you don't miss the conclusion to this unforgettable mystery. The news of the rescue spread faster than the prairie wind. By the time Mrs. Blackwell, Clara, Henry, Lila, and the other children returned to St. Louis, the city was waiting for them. Crowds gathered at the train station. Reporters jostled for a glimpse, and the mayor himself arrived to shake Mrs. Blackwell's hand. The children, blinking in the sunlight, were overwhelmed by the noise and the attention. Some clung to Mrs. Blackwell's skirts, others stared at the ground, their faces pale and thin. But beneath the cheers and the headlines, a different mood simmered. The truth about the orphan train had shocked the nation. The story was everywhere. Orphan train horror exposed. Children sold like cattle. The widow's children return. But at what cost? The public demanded answers, and the authorities scrambled to provide them. The first reckoning came for Silas Crowley and his men. The trial was held in St. Louis, in a courthouse packed with angry parents, grieving families, and curious onlookers. Crowley, once so smooth and confident, now looked small and broken in his prison clothes. He refused to speak, staring at the floor as witness after witness took the stand. Lila testified first. Her voice shook, but she told the truth. How the men in dark coats had boarded the train, how they had split the children into groups, how they had threatened and beaten anyone who resisted. She described the long walk through the prairie, the hunger, the fear, the way the men had sold the children to strangers in distant towns. Clara followed, her hand in Mrs. Blackwell's. She told the court about Henry, about the nights they spent hiding in the grass, about the promise she made to her brother to never let go. She described the moment they were separated, the days she spent searching for him, the relief and terror of being found. Other children testified, each with their own story of loss and survival. Some had been adopted by kind families, others by cruel ones. Some had escaped, others had been rescued. But all of them carried scars, some visible, some hidden. The jury found Crowley and his men guilty on all counts: kidnapping, child trafficking, assault, and murder. The judge sentenced them to life in prison, but for many it was not enough. How many more, one mother wept outside the courthouse. How many children are still missing? The search for the lost. The trial was only the beginning. As the truth came out, families across the country began to ask questions. Letters poured into the widow's home, into the mayor's office, into the newspapers. Parents who had sent their children west and never heard from them again demanded answers. Siblings who had been separated on the orphan trains begged for help finding each other. Mrs. Blackwell became a symbol of hope and grief. She spent her days answering letters, her nights searching records, her heart breaking with every new story. She worked with the authorities to create a registry of missing children, a list of names and faces that grew longer every day. Clara and Henry helped, sorting through photographs, reading letters, searching for clues. Lila became their friend and ally, her quiet strength a comfort to everyone at the widow's home. But for every child found, another remained lost. Some had been adopted under false names, their pasts erased. Others had died on the journey, their graves unmarked and forgotten. The truth was a patchwork of hope and heartbreak, and the work seemed endless. The nation reacts. The orphan train scandal rocked the country. Politicians called for new laws to protect children, to regulate adoptions, to punish those who profited from misery. Churches held vigils, communities raised money for the search, and newspapers ran editorials demanding justice. But not everyone wanted the truth. Some railway companies denied any wrongdoing, blaming the missing children on runaways and bad luck. A few powerful men tried to silence Mrs. Blackwell, threatening lawsuits and spreading rumors. But the public was on her side. The widow's home became a place of pilgrimage, a symbol of resilience and hope. People sent donations, food and clothes. Volunteers arrived to help with the search, to comfort the children, to honor the lost. Mrs. Blackwell, once so stern and alone, found herself surrounded by a new family. A family built not by blood, but by love and courage. The children struggle. For the children, the return home was bittersweet. Some were reunited with relatives, others found new families. But many struggled to adjust. Nightmares haunted their sleep. Memories of the train and the men in dark coats lingered in their minds. Clara and Henry clung to each other, afraid to be separated even for a moment. Lila, once so quiet, began to speak more, telling stories to the younger children, helping them find comfort in each other. Mrs. Blackwell started a new tradition at the widow's home. Every Sunday, the children gathered in the courtyard to plant a flower for each child still missing. The garden grew quickly, a riot of color and hope in the heart of the city. But healing was slow. Some children ran away, unable to bear the memories. Others grew angry, lashing out at the world that had failed them. Mrs. Blackwell did her best to help, but she knew that some wounds would never fully heal. The legacy of the orphan train. As the years passed, the story of the widow's children became legend. Books were written, songs were sung, and the garden at the widow's home became a place of remembrance for families across the country. But the legacy of the orphan train was not just one of loss. It was also a story of courage, of children who survived, of families who never gave up, of a woman who turned her grief into hope. Clara grew up to become a teacher, dedicating her life to helping children who had no one else. Henry, once so small and afraid, became a writer, telling the stories of the lost and the found. Lila stayed at the widow's home, working with Mrs. Blackwell to reunite families and comfort the broken-hearted. Mrs. Blackwell herself became a legend. She lived to see new laws passed, new homes built, new hope for children who had once been forgotten. She died peacefully, surrounded by the children she had saved. Her last words, a blessing for the future. The unanswered questions. But even as the world moved on, questions remained. How many orphan trains had vanished? How many children were still missing? How many secrets still lay buried along the tracks? Clara, Henry, and Lila never stopped searching. Every year on the anniversary of the train's disappearance, they returned to the riverbank, planting new flowers, reading the names of the lost, promising never to forget. And sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, Clara would hear a voice on the wind, a child's voice calling for home. She would close her eyes, hold Henry's hand, and whisper, "We're still looking. We'll never stop." But as the years pass and the world changes, a final letter arrives, one that hints at a new mystery, a new beginning, and a secret that even the widow's children never dared to imagine. The next chapter will reveal the last message from the past and the question that will echo for generations. Subscribe now so you don't miss the unforgettable conclusion to the Orphan train mystery. Years passed, and the world changed. The widow's home for lost children became a place of hope and healing, its garden blooming with flowers planted for every child who had vanished and every child who had come home. The story of the Orphan train faded from the headlines, but it never faded from the hearts of those who had lived it. Clara grew into a young woman, her hair long and dark, her eyes still searching. She became a teacher at the widow's home, helping new children find their way, telling them stories of courage and survival. Henry, always at her side, grew tall and strong, his laughter a comfort to everyone who heard it. Lila, quiet and steady, became Mrs. Blackwell's right hand, organizing the records, writing letters, and keeping the memory of the lost alive. But even as the years brought healing, the past was never far away. Every spring, on the anniversary of the train's disappearance, the children and staff gathered in the garden. They read the names of the missing, planted new flowers, and promised never to forget. One such spring, as the garden filled with color and song, a letter arrived at the widow's home. It was addressed simply, "To the widow's children." The handwriting was unfamiliar, the postmark smudged and unreadable. Mrs. Blackwell, now older and slower but still sharp, gathered Clara, Henry, and Lila in her office. She opened the letter with trembling hands and began to read aloud. "To those who remember, I was there that night. I saw what happened. I have carried this secret for too long, and now I am old. I cannot rest until the truth is known. The train did not vanish. It was taken. The men in dark coats were not strangers. They were men from the towns along the line, men who wanted children for their own, men who believed no one would come looking. Some of us escaped. Some of us were taken far away. Some of us never made it home. But I remember Clara. I remember Henry. I remember the promise we made, to never forget, to never stop searching. If you are reading this, know that you are not alone. There are others, children who survived, children who found new families, children who still remember. Do not give up. With hope, a friend." The room was silent as Mrs. Blackwell finished reading. Clara felt tears on her cheeks, Henry's hand in hers, Lila's arm around her shoulders. "Do you think it's real?" Henry asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Blackwell nodded. "I do. I think there are more of you out there, more children who survived, more stories to be told." Lila stood and went to the window, looking out at the garden. "We have to find them. We have to let them know they're not alone." Clara wiped her eyes and smiled. "We will. We'll write back. We'll tell our story. We'll keep the promise." The search begins again. The letter sparked something in the widow's home, a new sense of purpose, a new hope. Clara, Henry, and Lila began to write letters to newspapers across the country, telling their story, asking for anyone with information to come forward. They received dozens of replies. Some were from families who had adopted children from the orphan trains, children who had grown up never knowing where they came from. Others were from men and women who remembered the night the train vanished, who had seen children walking along the tracks, who had heard rumors of secret adoptions and hidden graves. Clara and Henry traveled to towns along the old railway line, meeting with survivors, listening to their stories, helping them reconnect with lost siblings and friends. Lila stayed at the widow's home, organizing the records, keeping track of every new name, every new clue. The work was slow and sometimes heartbreaking. Some children had died, their stories lost forever. Others had been adopted by families who loved them, but who never knew the truth of their past. A few had grown up angry and alone, unable to forgive the world that had taken everything from them. But for every story of loss, there was a story of hope. Brothers and sisters were reunited. Old friends found each other after decades apart. The garden at the widow's home grew larger every year, each flower a symbol of a life remembered, a promise kept. The truth comes to light. As the search continued, more letters arrived. Some were from survivors, others from people who had helped the children along the way. A farmer who had given them food, a teacher who had hidden them in her classroom, a doctor who had treated their wounds. One letter from a woman named Ruth stood out. She wrote, "I was one of the children taken from the train. I was adopted by a family in Nebraska. They were kind, but I always wondered what happened to the others. I remember Clara. I remember the song she sang to us at night. I remember the promise to never forget, to never stop searching. Thank you for keeping that promise." Clara wept as she read Ruth's letter. She remembered the little girl with the golden hair, the way she had held Henry's hand, the way she had smiled even in the darkest moments. Henry wrote back, telling Ruth about the garden, about the flowers, about the promise they had kept. More letters followed. Some were from children who had escaped and built new lives. Others were from families who had adopted orphans and wanted to know more about their past. The story of the widow's children spread across the country. Newspapers ran articles about the survivors, about the search for the lost, about the garden that bloomed in St. Louis. Healing and hope. The work was never easy. Some days, Clara and Henry felt overwhelmed by the weight of so many stories, so much loss. But they also felt hope, a hope that grew stronger with every letter, every reunion, every flower planted in the garden. Lila, who had once been so quiet, became a leader at the widow's home. She organized reunions, helped survivors find their families, and spoke at gatherings about the importance of remembering the past. Mrs. Blackwell, now very old, watched with pride as her children, her family, carried on the work she had begun. She knew that the world would never be free of sorrow, but she also knew that love and courage could heal even the deepest wounds. Every spring, on the anniversary of the train's disappearance, the widow's home held a celebration. Survivors came from all over the country, bringing their families, their stories, their hope. They read the names of the lost, planted new flowers, and promised never to forget. Clara stood in the garden, surrounded by friends and family, and felt a peace she had never known before. "We kept the promise," she whispered. "We never stopped searching. We never forgot." The final message. One evening, as the sun set over the garden, a young boy arrived at the widow's home. He carried a letter addressed to Clara. She opened it and read, "I am your brother. I was taken from the train that night. I grew up in a family that loved me, but I always wondered where I came from. I found your story in the newspaper. I want to come home." Clara wept with joy. She wrote back, inviting him to the widow's home, to the garden, to the family that had never stopped searching. When he arrived, the reunion was quiet and full of tears. They sat together in the garden, telling stories, sharing memories, planting a new flower for the promise kept. The legacy. The story of the widow's children became a legend, a story of loss and hope, of courage and love, of a promise that was never broken. Clara, Henry, Lila, and the others grew old. But the garden at the widow's home bloomed brighter every year. New children came, new stories were told, new promises were made. And every spring, as the flowers opened and the world turned green, the children gathered in the garden, read the names of the lost, and whispered the promise that had carried them through the darkest night. We will never forget. We will never stop searching. We will always come home. But as the garden blooms and the world moves on, a final secret remains, one last story waiting to be told, one last question that will echo for generations. The next chapter will reveal the ultimate truth behind the orphan train, and the answer that will change everything. Subscribe now so you don't miss the unforgettable conclusion to The Widow's Children. Spring in St. Louis was always a time of hope, but in the years after the orphan train tragedy, it became something more. A time of remembrance, of reunion, of promises kept, and wounds slowly healing. The garden at the widow's home for lost children was now famous across the country, a living memorial to the children who had vanished, the ones who had come home, and the families who had never stopped searching. Every year, on the anniversary of the train's disappearance, the garden filled with people. Survivors came from as far as California and Maine, bringing their children and grandchildren. Some brought faded photographs, others brought letters, and all brought stories, stories of loss, of survival, of the long road home. Clara, now a woman in her 30s, stood at the center of it all. She wore a simple dress, her hair streaked with gray, her eyes still bright with the fire of memory. Henry, tall and gentle, stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders. Lila, always steady, moved through the crowd, greeting old friends, comforting those who wept. This year, the gathering was larger than ever. The newspapers had run a new story about the widow's children, and people who had never spoken before came forward with memories, with clues, with questions that had haunted them for decades. As the sun set, the crowd gathered in a circle around the garden's oldest tree. Mrs. Blackwell, now frail and nearly blind, sat in a chair at the front, her hands folded in her lap. Clara knelt beside her, holding her hand. "We're all here, Mama," Clara whispered. "We kept the promise." Mrs. Blackwell smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "You did more than that, my dear. You brought them home." Henry stepped forward, holding a list of names. "Tonight, we remember every child who was lost, every child who was found, and every family that never gave up hope." He began to read the names, his voice steady and clear. As each name was spoken, a child stepped forward and planted a flower in the garden. Some names brought cheers, others brought tears, but all were honored. When the last name was read, the crowd stood in silence, the only sound the wind in the trees and the soft sobs of those who remembered. The final letter. As the ceremony ended, a young woman approached Clara. She was tall and thin, her hair pulled back in a neat braid, her eyes full of questions. "My name is Sarah," she said. "I think I'm one of the missing." Clara took her hands, her heart pounding. "Tell me everything." Sarah told her story, how she had been taken from the train that night, how she had been adopted by a family in Oklahoma, how she had always wondered where she came from. She had found a letter among her adoptive mother's things, a letter from Mrs. Blackwell, written years before, begging for news of Sarah's fate. "I never knew who I was," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "But when I read your story in the newspaper, I knew I had to come." Clara hugged her, tears streaming down her face. "You're home now. You're one of us." As the crowd gathered around Sarah, another letter arrived, this one addressed to Mrs. Blackwell. It was from a man named Thomas, who claimed to have been one of the men in dark coats. "I am old now," the letter began. I have carried this secret for too long. I was there that night. I did terrible things. I helped take the children from the train. I did it for money, for fear, for reasons I can no longer remember. But I never forgot their faces. I never forgot the sound of their voices calling for help. I am sorry. I am so sorry. If you can forgive me, please plant a flower for me in your garden. Let me rest. Mrs. Blackwell wept as Clara read the letter aloud. The crowd was silent, the weight of forgiveness heavy in the air. Henry knelt and planted a single white flower at the edge of the garden. For Thomas, he said softly. For all who were lost and all who were found. The truth revealed. As the night deepened, the survivors gathered around the fire, sharing stories, singing songs, and remembering the promise they had made so long ago, to never forget, to never stop searching, to always come home. Clara sat with Sarah, Henry, and Lila, her heart full. She thought of the children who had not come home, of the families who still waited, of the secrets that still lingered in the shadows. But she also thought of the garden, of the flowers that bloomed every spring, of the letters and stories that had brought so many people together. We did it, she whispered. We kept the promise. Lila nodded, her eyes shining. And we'll keep it for as long as we live. Henry smiled, his arm around Clara's shoulders. We're a family now, all of us. As the fire burned low, Mrs. Blackwell spoke for the last time. The world is full of sorrow, she said, her voice thin but strong. But it is also full of hope. You are the proof of that. You are my children, and I am proud of every one of you. The crowd cheered, their voices rising into the night. The legacy. The story of the widow's children became more than a legend. It became a lesson. Schools taught it. Churches preached it. Families told it to their children. The garden at the widow's home grew larger every year, each flower a symbol of a life remembered, a promise kept. Clara, Henry, Lila, and Sarah grew old together, their lives intertwined by the mystery and the miracle of the orphan train. They continued to search for the lost, to welcome the found, to plant flowers for the forgiven. And every spring, as the world turned green and the garden bloomed, the children gathered to read the names, to tell the stories, to keep the promise alive. The final secret. One morning, as Clara walked through the garden, she found a small box buried beneath the oldest tree. Inside was a note written in a child's hand. If you find this, you kept your promise. Thank you for never giving up. I am safe. I am loved. I am home. Clara wept as she read the note, her heart full of gratitude and peace. She planted a new flower at the spot, whispering a prayer for all the children who had ever been lost and all who had ever been found. But as the garden blooms and the promise is kept, a final question remains, one that will echo through generations. What does it truly mean to come home? And how do we honor the lost while building a future for the living? The next chapter will reveal the ultimate lesson of the widow's children and the hope that endures beyond every mystery. Subscribe now so you don't miss the unforgettable conclusion to this story. The years rolled on, and the garden at the widow's home for lost children became a living tapestry of memory and hope. Each spring, the flowers bloomed brighter, their colors a testament to the lives remembered and the promises kept. The story of the orphan train, once a tale of heartbreak and loss, had become a story of healing, of family, and of the enduring power of love. Clara, Henry, Lila, and Sarah grew older, their hair silvering, their steps slowing, but their spirits never dimmed. The widow's home was no longer just a refuge for the lost. It was a place where anyone could come to find comfort, to share a story, to plant a flower for someone they loved. Every year, on the anniversary of the train's disappearance, the garden filled with people. Some were survivors, some were descendants. Some were strangers who had heard the story and wanted to be part of something bigger than themselves. They came with letters, with photographs, with tears and laughter and hope. Clara, now the matriarch of the home, stood at the center of the garden, her hands clasped around a single red thread. She looked out at the crowd, at Henry, at Lila, at Sarah, at the children who played among the flowers, and felt a peace she had never known before. She began the ceremony, as she always did, by reading the names of the lost. Each name was a prayer, a promise, a reminder that no one is ever truly forgotten. When she finished, she spoke to the crowd. "We have come a long way," she said, her voice strong and clear. "We have faced sorrow and loss, but we have also found hope and healing. We have learned that home is not just a place. It is the people who love us, the memories we carry, the promises we keep." She paused, looking at the red thread in her hands. "This thread was given to me by my mother before she died. She told me that as long as I held on to it, I would never be alone. I have carried it with me through every trial, every loss, every joy. And now I pass it on to you." She tied the thread to the oldest tree in the garden, and one by one the others did the same. Soon the tree was covered in red threads, each one a symbol of connection, of family, of the promise that no child would ever be lost again. The last reunion. After the ceremony, the crowd lingered in the garden, sharing stories, planting new flowers, and searching for familiar faces. Clara moved among them, hugging old friends, welcoming new ones, listening to the stories that had become the heart of the widow's home. Henry found her by the fountain, his eyes shining with tears. "Do you remember the first time we came here?" he asked, his voice soft. Clara, Henry, Lila, and Sarah grew old together, their lives intertwined by the mystery and the miracle of the orphan train. They continued to search for the lost, to welcome the found, to plant flowers for the forgiven. And every spring, as the world turned green and the garden bloomed, the children gathered to read the names, to tell the stories, to keep the promise alive. The final secret. One morning, as Clara walked through the garden, she found a small box buried beneath the oldest tree. Inside was a note written in a child's hand. "If you find this, you kept your promise. Thank you for never giving up. I am safe. I am loved. I am home." Clara wept as she read the note, her heart full of gratitude and peace. She planted a new flower at the spot, whispering a prayer for all the children who had ever been lost and all who had ever been found. But as the garden blooms and the promise is kept, a final question remains, one that will echo through generations. What does it truly mean to come home, and how do we honor the lost while building a future for the living? The next chapter will reveal the ultimate lesson of the widow's children and the hope that endures beyond every mystery. Subscribe now so you don't miss the unforgettable conclusion to this story. The years rolled on, and the garden at the widow's home for lost children became a living tapestry of memory and hope. Each spring, the flowers bloomed brighter, their colors a testament to the lives remembered and the promises kept. The story of the orphan train, once a tale of heartbreak and loss, had become a story of healing, of family, and of the enduring power of love. Clara, Henry, Lila, and Sarah grew older, their hair silvering, their steps slowing, but their spirits never dimmed. The widow's home was no longer just a refuge for the lost. It was a place where anyone could come to find comfort, to share a story, to plant a flower for someone they loved. Every year, on the anniversary of the train's disappearance, the garden filled with people. Some were survivors, some were descendants. Some were strangers who had heard the story and wanted to be part of something bigger than themselves. They came with letters, with photographs, with tears and laughter and hope. Clara, now the matriarch of the home, stood at the center of the garden, her hands clasped around a single red thread. She looked out at the crowd, at Henry, at Lila, at Sarah, at the children who played among the flowers, and felt a peace she had never known before. She began the ceremony, as she always did, by reading the names of the lost. Each name was a prayer, a promise, a reminder that no one is ever truly forgotten. When she finished, she spoke to the crowd. "We have come a long way," she said, her voice strong and clear. "We have faced sorrow and loss, but we have also found hope and healing. We have learned that home is not just a place. It is the people who love us, the memories we carry, the promises we keep." She paused, looking at the red thread in her hands. "This thread was given to me by my mother before she died. She told me that as long as I held on to it, I would never be alone. I have carried it with me through every trial, every loss, every joy. And now I pass it on to you." She tied the thread to the oldest tree in the garden, and one by one the others did the same. Soon the tree was covered in red threads, each one a symbol of connection, of family, of the promise that no child would ever be lost again. The last reunion. After the ceremony, the crowd lingered in the garden, sharing stories, planting new flowers, and searching for familiar faces. Clara moved among them, hugging old friends, welcoming new ones, listening to the stories that had become the heart of the widow's home. Henry found her by the fountain, his eyes shining with tears. "Do you remember the first time we came here?" he asked, his voice soft. Oh, Clara nodded. "I was so scared. I thought we would never find home again." Henry smiled. "But we did. We found it in each other, in Lila and Mrs. Blackwell, and everyone who never gave up." Lila joined them, her arm around Sarah's shoulders. "We built something beautiful here, something that will last." Sarah nodded, her eyes full of gratitude. "I never thought I would find my family, but I did, right here." They stood together, watching the children play among the flowers, their laughter a song of hope, the final secret. As the sun set, a young girl approached Clara. She was no more than 10, her hair in braids, her eyes wide with wonder. Clara, Henry, Lila, and Sarah grew old together, their lives intertwined by the mystery and the miracle of the orphan train. They continued to search for the lost, to welcome the found, to plant flowers for the forgiven. And every spring, as the world turned green and the garden bloomed, the children gathered to read the names, to "Miss Clara," she said, holding out a small box. "I found this under the old tree." Clara took the box, her hands trembling. She opened it and found a letter written in a child's hand. "To whoever finds this, thank you for never giving up. Thank you for searching, for remembering, for loving. I am safe. I am home. If you ever feel lost, look for the red thread. It will lead you back. With love, a friend." Clara wept as she read the letter, her heart full of gratitude and peace. She knelt and hugged the girl, whispering, "You are home. You are loved." The legacy continues. As night fell, the garden glowed with lanterns and laughter. The children of the widow's home, some born there, some found, some simply drawn by the promise of hope, danced among the flowers, their voices rising into the night. Clara, Henry, Lila, and Sarah sat together beneath the oldest tree, watching the world they had helped create. We did it, Lila whispered. We kept the promise, Henry nodded. And we'll keep it for as long as we live. Sarah smiled, her eyes shining. We are the widow's children, and we are home, the meaning of home. In the years that followed, the widow's home became a place of pilgrimage. People came from all over the world to see the garden, to hear the stories, to tie a red thread to the tree and make a promise of their own. Some came to find family, others to find forgiveness, others simply to find hope. And every spring, as the flowers bloomed and the world turned green, the children gathered in the garden, read the names of the lost, and whispered the promise that had carried them through the darkest night. We will never forget. We will never stop searching. We will always come home. If this story moved you, or if you believe in shining a light on hidden truths, please like and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more untold stories to the world.